Nope.
Oh, hello, dear listener, and welcome to a very special bonus video. I suppose you're wondering why I gathered you all here today. Well, you see, Halloween is right around the corner, and I thought what better way to celebrate than with 3 special Halloween videos from Reddit. So, without any further ado, let's begin.
Number 1. This happened just over 3 years ago now, on Halloween night. I was 16 years old, and myself and my friends were at that perfect age where you're still young enough to get away with trick-or-treating, but old enough to stay out late without your parents' supervision. We had been trick-or-treating for a couple of hours, and it was just starting to get dark outside. The children had trickled down to only a few, and most of the houses had begun to shut their lights off. Myself and my friends lived in a relatively well-off area of town. The houses were large and well-kept, and the yards were clean and perfectly manicured. We hadn't witnessed anything of a dangerous or scary nature for the time that we lived there. Our neighborhood had only been built a few years before and skirted the edge of a considerably large forest. We would often hide in the forest during the evenings to sneak the occasional joint or cigarette. We were walking down the street alongside the forest, talking and laughing about our neighbors' reactions to our costumes and how they had given us the reject candy because we were getting too old for trick-or-treating. As we were laughing, we suddenly begin to hear the quiet laughter of a child join in. I turn around to see where the laughter was coming from, and my friend Jenna asks, "Did you hear that too?" We stop at once and begin to look around in all directions to find the source of this laughter. Mandy, my friend who is standing closest to the edge of the forest, yanks on my hand and points to her right. We all turn to look where she is pointing, and roughly 3 meters away from us, standing in the forest, is a very tiny girl. She appears to be no older than 3 or 4 years old and is dressed in a red and black ladybug costume. She is standing by herself in the trees with no adult in sight. Knowing that this girl is probably lost, we begin shouting for her to come to us. The little girl starts laughing again and quickly turns around and begins to run into the dark forest. Without hesitation, we start running after her. We break through the barrier of the trees and are quickly assaulted with the complete and utter blackness of the forest. The girl is nowhere in sight, but we can hear the crumpling of leaves up ahead and her small voice shout, "You can't catch me." Jenna shouts out, "Sweetie, please come back. You can have as much candy as you want." Thinking back now, that probably wasn't the best thing we could have shouted at a child. Jenna takes out her cell phone and uses her flashlight app in hopes that we can see better in the direction she's running. Off in the distance, we can barely make out the bobbing of the black antenna of her costume. Half an hour goes by, and the little girl is nowhere to be found. At this point, we think it's best to just call the police before she ventures too deep into the forest. Everyone takes out their phone to find that we have no cell reception. This is bizarre because the forest should still be within the cell phone range. Feeling dejected, we slow down our pace while still shining our flashlights in all directions in the mere hope that we might catch a glimpse of her. We continue walking for another 10 minutes when, at last, we hear the giggle again. We shine our lights in the directions of the giggle and see a momentary flash of black and red. We pick up running, and we hear her tiny voice yell out, "Please, come find me." We're running as fast as we can when Mandy screams and tumbles to the ground. "I tripped over a huge bump," she shouts. We stop, help her get back up, and shine our lights around to see what she had tripped over. A few feet over from Mandy, we shine our lights on what appears to be a makeshift pile of dirt. The pile of dirt was no larger than 3 feet long and 2 feet wide. I whisper, "Oh my God," to myself when I see a tiny black shoe inching its way out from the pile of dirt. "You guys, do you see that?" I say as I shine my flashlight onto the small shoe. Jenna whispers, "How does she cover herself so quickly?" Mandy inches her way over to the pile and says, "Sweetie, you have to come out of there right now. You won't be able to breathe." Mandy begins dusting over the pile of dirt with her hand, trying to uncover the girl's face. Myself and Jenna also start to dust away the mud. We keep dusting until we eventually see a flash of red fabric. I tug at the dress and it comes loose from the mud. I fall back onto the dirt, dress in hand. Mandy starts screaming, and I realize why when I look back into the pile of mud and only see bones. On top of the bones laid a pair of tiny black antennas. We all start to call the police again, but none of our phones have any reception. So we do the only thing we can do, which is run back in the direction we came from and try to find help. We are eventually able to contact the police at a neighbor's house. The police discovered the remains of the little girl the next day. I had kept the dress to give to the police, and they used their dogs to find the scent of her grave. We come to learn that 2 years prior, a 3-year-old girl had been kidnapped on her street on Halloween night in a neighboring city. We had seen the news stories, but we didn't make the connection until the police spoke to us. We don't know why they hadn't searched the forest surrounding our neighborhood. The only conclusion we came to is that at the time, our neighborhood was still very new and was hardly even a development. The police had been searching throughout the city and in the neighborhoods closer to where the girl had lived. To this day, I still don't know what to believe. Myself, Mandy, and Jenna have drifted apart since that night. We all know what we saw and heard, but it's a hard thing for other people to understand. We were meant to find her that night. I'm not sure why she chose us, and sometimes I wish she hadn't, but I'm glad her family finally has some closure. Number 2. This might just be a Midwest thing because I've talked to other people who have never heard of this particular term, but every Halloween, my neighbors would create their own chicken pit. A chicken pit is similar to a haunted house, only they're nothing official, just something that someone creates in their garage or cellar. They also tend to be much gorier than your typical haunted house, and there is always the chance that you will get splattered with fake blood. My neighbors were kind of weird to begin with. At any given time, anywhere between 2 to 10 people were living in the house. But the chicken pit was a yearly tradition, and most kids went into this particular one with or without the permission of their parents. A few days before Halloween, when I was around 11 or 12, we noticed that the cellar door was open and the chicken pit sign was out. I had only been in their chicken pit one other year and I hated it. I am not easily scared, but very easily startled. But this particular year, it was supposed to be less scary, and there were fewer people living in the house at the time, so they didn't make it as extravagant as other years. So, with the prodding of my friends, I agreed to go down. One traditional rule of the chicken pit is you can only go alone, or in a tiny group of 2 or 3. Of course, my sadistic friends made me go in alone. I walked down the stairs. It was quieter than usual in the damp and humid cellar, so I braced myself for something to jump out at me. The walls were decked out in the usual Halloween decorations, huge cobwebs mostly. I reached the bottom of the stairs and looked around. Huge refrigerator boxes created the walls of the route to take, but I wasn't quite sure which direction to go. I heard a scuffling of feet to my right, so I just followed the sound. I kept thinking I heard a muffled squawk like an actual chicken. It was so constant, I thought it must be a looped recording or something. I continued to walk for a bit until hitting a dead end, and I heard a faint, deep laugh. I reminded myself that it was just my neighbors and braced myself for the inevitable scare. But nothing jumped out at me. All I could hear was more scuffling. Only this time it came from directly on the other side of the cardboard wall. I then heard someone muttering to themselves. They sounded angry, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. As I tried to retrace my path, I got a little confused and made a wrong turn. I ended up directly in front of a big sheet hanging up on the wall, creating a partition. A faint light was shining through the sheet, and as my eyes adjusted, I can make out a faint outline of something. I slowly realized it was a figure that appeared to be a man holding an axe and something else. It was a chicken that he was holding by the neck. I watched uncomfortably as he put the wriggling chicken to the ground and lifted the axe. I closed my eyes before I heard the thud of the axe hitting both something fleshy and the floor of the cellar. I turned around and ran for the exit, knocking down one of the cardboard walls. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dark figure duck down behind an old workbench that became visible when I knocked over the wall. I heard the laughing again, but this time it sounded extremely menacing. I was running so blindly that I ran into the bottom step of the cellar, whacking my knee. I heard the laugh louder and closer than ever, and I scrambled up the stairs without thinking. As I emerged from the cellar, my friends were waiting for me and laughing as I fell in front of them, knees throbbing. I collected myself and stood up, and their laughing stopped. They were staring at me with shock. I looked down at myself, and I was absolutely covered in blood. Blood had splattered on my tennis shoes and had soaked up my cuffs. There was also large blotches of blood covering my shirt and the rivulets of my arms, but I didn't have a visible scratch on me. The blood was already turning rusty brown like real blood. We heard shouting from the porch. It was our neighbors. "Hey, you kids! The chicken pit isn't open yet. We don't have anyone down there, so if you get hurt wandering around, we're not going to be held responsible." My friends and I ran home, and none of us ever spoke of it again. I buried my clothes under some garbage in the dumpster and never told my parents. Number 3. I used to own a small Halloween-themed shop. It's located downtown in a fairly small city, and unlike many businesses in town after Walmart's arrival, my store never really suffered when it came to customers. Of course, it was only open for the month of October. I sold a lot of unique things you might find at other novelty stores in bigger cities, but for cheaper prices. I really didn't do it for the profit as much as I did to celebrate the spooky Halloween spirit. I also love to celebrate that spirit by doing my best to scare the crap out of people every Halloween. One particular Halloween, my chosen victim was my buddy Alex. He was a pretty relaxed and calm guy most of the time, so he was the perfect person for the plan I had in mind. First, you should know that I always begin packing up my store every Halloween fairly early in the morning, as it was unlikely to get customers on the holiday itself. I told Alex that I had much heavier merchandise that year and that I could use some help moving it all out. Not knowing what he was getting himself into, he accepted, and I told him to meet me at the shop at 10 at night, sharp. As I said, Alex was a relaxed and calm guy most of the time. Unfortunately for him, he had once told me about his irrational fear of clowns and how he could not function around them. So naturally, my plan involved dressing up like a clown. When he arrived at the shop, I would stand perfectly still like a statue. Once he couldn't find me, he would then call me most likely. But when my phone rang, it would be in the pocket of an apparent clown statue, and when he came over to investigate, I'd give him my best scare. Pretty simple plan, right? Everything was set in motion. I dressed up, stood near the back of the store, obscured by some boxes and other decorations, and waited upon his arrival. A little after 10, Alex entered. It was very dark, as I'd made the last-minute decision to cut the lights out before he arrived. He called out my name a few times, but of course I didn't respond. I heard him walking around a bit, looking around the shop for me. I could barely hold back laughter. After a bit more shuffling, I heard Alex speak in a very defensive tone. "Not funny, dude." I looked around, but there was definitely no way he could see me right now, even if I had twitched or anything. I continued to play dumb. "Come on, man," he repeated again, sounding angrier this time. "That's not funny." Confused, I quietly adjusted a nearby stack of boxes so I could peer through the crack towards his voice. I couldn't make out his shape very well, but I knew for sure he was not looking in my direction. Suddenly my phone rang. I heard Alex turn toward the sound instantly, and I froze, giddy with the excitement that the plan might be working. But as he approached, I realized he wasn't holding his phone, and a wave of disappointment fell over me as I discovered my prank had been ruined by another caller. "Alright, fine, you got me," I announced shortly after the phone stopped ringing, taking off my mask and stepping into the open. But Alex's face didn't look so relieved. His face twisted in such horror that I had never seen before. He began yelling and shouting panicky words, and I had spent a few minutes trying to calm him down. He explained that when he entered the store, a man in a clown costume began to stare at him and walk towards him slowly. But when my phone rang, the man dashed right out of the store. Alex had no idea that I was actually hiding in the back the whole time. He naturally assumed the man was me playing the prank. I don't even want to think what would have happened if Alex had showed up late that night, or if my other buddy hadn't called during the prank. Suffice to say, I no longer run a Halloween store. Thank you, dear listener, for joining me in this very special bonus video. If you did, be sure to mutilate that like button and subscribe for future videos if you haven't done so already. I would like to give a quick thank you and shout out to Emily's Designs for providing the background video that I use for the stories. Be sure to check out her channel by following the link in the description. I know a lot of people are going to be out partying tonight to celebrate the most wonderful holiday of the year, so if you're one of them, please be safe out there, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.